When I first moved to the Greater London area from Birmingham, I was very excited. I had gotten a new job in London but couldn't afford to live close to my job in the heart of the city. To save money on rent, I decided to move into a flat in a neighborhood called Croydon. Although the neighborhood was described by many as rough, it wasn't as rough as the area I lived in Birmingham. In my new neighborhood, there were many developments happening in the area. A few shops had opened, and the neighbors were very friendly. A few of my friends warned me about moving there, but I quite liked the area and decided if I didn't like it, I would simply leave. I loved my flat, which featured a small veranda perfect for late-night cocktails. One night, about 3 months after moving into my flat, I had the worst thing ever happen to me. I had decided to go for drinks in the city with some coworkers. Therefore, I would be home late at around 11 o'clock instead of my usual 6:30 in the evening. I had no reason to believe going home at that time would be unsafe. I had taken the tram to a stop about a 5-minute walk from home. On the tram were myself and 2 young men. One of the men looked at me and smiled while the other just looked down at his phone the entire ride. I exited the station and began my walk home when I was approached by the 2 men clothed in full black. One of the guys asked me for directions to a nearby park, and I gave them the directions and continued walking. I became suspicious as to why they were going to the park so late in the evening. The parks closed at dusk and nobody was allowed in until dawn. The more I questioned their intentions in my mind, the more nervous I became. I looked back to find that they were still walking in my direction, which was the opposite way from where I had told them to go. That's when I began running. They started running after me. They caught up to me quickly, and one of the men grabbed my hair and pulled me to the ground. When I fell to the ground, he snatched my purse, while his friend snatched my trainers from my feet. After that, the 2 men ran away. I walked to my flat that night bare feet, which made the walk seem like forever. All my belongings had been taken by the thieves, including the keys to my flat. Luckily, my landlord who lived in the building was home and able to let me into my flat. Be safe everyone and stay spooked.
This story was sent to us from Todd. This story happened to my grandmother. My grandmother was living alone for about 3 years after my grandfather died. My brother and I always assisted her when she needed help, but for the most part, she was very independent. One day she decided to go to the grocery store a few towns over from the town she lived in. She got what she needed from the grocery store and walked back to her car. While she was loading the groceries in the trunk, she noticed a car with very dark tinted windows. The windows were so dark that she couldn't see who was in it. The car pulled over nearby where she was parked. She got into her car and pulled out of the parking lot. My grandmother noticed that the car was traveling in the same direction as her. After about 10 minutes, she felt like she was being followed. My grandmother lived in a very residential area, and she had never seen a car like this one in her neighborhood before. As she inched closer to her house, she was becoming more and more nervous. She pulled over on the street next to hers because she didn't want this person to follow her to her house. After she pulled over, the other car got in front of her and blocked her from being able to drive away. She started to back up, but then another car matching the one in front of her pulled up behind her, and now she was blocked in. Unfortunately, my grandmother didn't even have a cell phone. She hadn't adapted to technology and still only used her house phone. She even carried a small phone book wherever she went. She just stood there frozen with fear. After a couple of minutes, a tall man exited the vehicle and walked towards my grandmother's car. She had her doors locked, but the man banged on her window and demanded that she open her door immediately. When she wouldn't open her door, he pointed a gun right at her, which spooked her. She unlocked the door, and the man snatched her purse and jewelry and drove away. They even stole her wedding ring, which was obviously very sentimental to her. One of the neighbors saw the whole thing happen and called the police. The police called my father to notify him of what had happened. They looked for the guys who robbed my grandmother, but they didn't find them that day. Until a few days later when they did the same thing to another elderly lady. Their next victim didn't hand over her belongings and they ended up doing the unthinkable. I can't believe that there are people in this world who will end the life of another human being, especially an elderly person, over money and jewelry. My dad went to all the pawn shops in the area to find my grandmother's ring and he ended up finding it. My grandmother didn't go anywhere alone since the incident and my father ended up putting her into a nursing home where she is much safer. Stay spooked.
The story I'm about to tell you happened to me when I was 19 and still living in Miami, where I worked at a popular strip club as a dancer. I worked the late night shift and would often leave work between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning. I usually traveled home with one of the security guards who lived a few houses away from me. I felt safe with him because of his large size and the fact that he was packing that heat, if you know what I mean. On this night, my neighbor, the security guard, had taken the night off, so I carpooled with a few of the other dancers who also worked at the club. We left the club at about 3 in the morning. Working as a dancer was not only risky because some of the guys were attached and would sometimes act inappropriately, but it was also risky because we were carrying large amounts of cash which attracted the wrong type of attention, and of course we were more vulnerable because we were women. When we left the club, we looked around to make sure that nobody was watching us. There was a group of guys who didn't seem to even notice us, but as extra precaution we waited for them to leave first and then we left right after them. My friend Katrina was driving, I was on the front passenger side, and our friend Jasmine was in the back seat. We traveled behind the car with the guys for about 3 minutes before both our car and their car stopped at a red light. When the light turned green, the car in front of started driving, then made a sudden stop, causing Katrina to slam right into their car, hitting them from behind. After the car we were in hit theirs, their car came to a complete stop, and so did ours. Nobody came out of theirs, and right away I began to have a bad feeling. "I gotta check on them," Katrina said. I told her not to get out and to wait for them to approach us instead. Jasmine suggested we call the police, but that was not an option at the time since we had all been drinking before we left the club. We all sat waiting for about 2 minutes before Katrina got out of the car and began walking towards the car in front of. Before Katrina could make it up to their car, 4 masked men jumped out, 2 from the front and 2 from the back. All 4 men were packing heat and they pointed them at us. "Gimme all your money," the driver yelled. They snatched our purses and all the jewelry we were wearing. They even stole our cell phones and Katrina's car keys. We were stranded on the side of the road with no way of getting home, no money, and less dignity. We just had all our belongings stolen, including more than $20,000 in cash. We did call the police to report the incident after all, but they never found out who did it. Since that night, I haven't returned to that club again. My advice is if you are traveling late at night and someone brake checks you, just dial 911 instead of getting out of your car and risk ending up like me and my friends.